The wedding invitation lay torn in half on the polished marble floor, its gold-embossed letters now meaningless, its promise shattered before it ever had the chance to breathe. Outside, the afternoon sun burned brightly, indifferent to storm unraveling inside the grand hall where pride, judgment, and secrets collided in a way no one had expected. Before we begin, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet strength of people who rise after being broken, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Heartfelt Stories. Your support keeps these stories alive. Aarav Mehta stood at the center of the room, his hand steady, but his heart anything but. The murmurs around him were sharp, cutting, filled with disapproval that had already decided his fate. Across from him, the family of the woman he loved watched him as if he were a mistake that needed to be corrected, a stain that could be erased if they spoke loudly enough. He had always known this moment might come. Still, knowing didn't make it easier. Aarav wasn't just a man in love. He was a single father. And to them, that single detail erased everything else he was. The accusations had started quietly, almost politely, wrapped in concern and tradition. Then they grew louder, heavier, until they crushed the very air in the room. They spoke of reputation, of society, of how their daughter deserved someone uncomplicated, someone without a past that carried responsibility and scars. But what they really meant was simple. They didn't want him. Not because he lacked character. Not because he lacked integrity. But because he came with a child. His daughter, little Meher, was waiting at home, blissfully unaware that her future was being debated like a business deal. Aarav's eyes briefly closed as he remembered her small hands clutching his shirt that morning, her soft voice asking if she could call someone mom soon. That question had carried hope, innocence, and a belief in happiness that he worked so hard to protect. And now that hope trembled. The woman he loved, Kavya, stood silent among her family. Her silence hurt more than their words. It wasn't cruel silence, but it was heavy, conflicted, torn between love and fear. Aarav could see in her eyes the struggle, the hesitation, the weight of expectation she had been raised to obey. Her parents spoke again, firmer this time, drawing a line that felt final. They demanded that Aarav cancel the wedding. They insisted it was the only way to avoid disgrace, the only way to preserve their dignity. They didn't shout. They didn't need to. Their certainty was louder than any raised voice. And in that moment, Aarav understood something painful. Love alone wasn't enough when it stood against pride, fear, and prejudice. He looked at Kavya one last time, searching for something, anything, that would tell him to stay, to fight, to believe. But what he found was uncertainty. So he made a decision that felt like tearing his own heart apart. He nodded. It was a small gesture, but it echoed like thunder. The room relaxed slightly, as if a problem had been resolved. But for Aarav, nothing was resolved. Everything had been lost. He turned and walked away without another word, leaving behind the shattered invitation, the wedding that would never happen, and the love that had almost been enough. The sun outside felt too bright as he stepped into it. Life didn't pause for heartbreak. It moved forward, relentless and indifferent, and so did he. Days turned into weeks, and Aarav returned his routine, but something inside him had changed. He smiled for Meher, played with her, read her bedtime stories, and packed her lunches, but in the quiet moments, the silence pressed in. He had always believed that if he worked hard enough, loved deeply enough, and stayed honest, things would eventually fall into place. But life had reminded him that not everything could be earned or deserved. Some things were simply taken away. Yet, he didn't allow himself to break. Because he couldn't. Meher needed him whole, even when he felt anything but. What no one in Kavya's family knew, what they had never bothered to ask, was the truth about Aarav's life beyond their assumptions. They saw a single father and imagined weakness, complication, and burden. They never saw the man who had built something from nothing. Years ago, after losing his wife, Aarav had faced a world that suddenly felt empty. He had no roadmap, no support system, and no guarantee that things would ever improve. But he had a daughter who needed him, and that was enough to keep him moving. He worked late nights, took risks others were too afraid to take, and slowly built a company that grew beyond anyone's expectations. He never spoke about it openly, not because he was hiding, but because he didn't feel the need to prove himself to anyone. Success to him wasn't about recognition. It was about stability, about giving Meher a life where she would never feel the absence that he had once feared. And over time, that quiet determination turned into something powerful. His company didn't just survive, it thrived. Ironically, it grew so much that it eventually became the parent organization of several businesses, including one that Kavya's family proudly managed. But they never knew, because Aarav never mentioned it. Because to him, love wasn't a transaction. Months passed before their worlds collided again. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind that doesn't announce itself as life-changing. Aarav had arrived at one of his company's branches for an internal review. The building was familiar, though the faces inside weren't. As he walked through the doors, conversations hushed. There was a shift in the air, a recognition that didn't come from familiarity, but from authority. And then, at the far end of the room, he saw them, Kavya's family. Their expressions changed slowly, confusion giving way to realization, and realization to something much heavier. Shock. The same man they had dismissed, judged, and rejected now stood before them in a position they had never imagined. The truth unfolded not through words, but through presence. Aarav didn't need to say anything. The respect others showed him spoke, louder than explanations ever could. For the first time, the balance of power had shifted. But Aarav didn't feel victorious. He didn't feel the satisfaction they might have expected. He felt something else entirely. Sadness. Because this wasn't how he wanted them to see him. Not as someone powerful. Not as someone above them. But as someone worthy of respect, regardless of status. Kavya stood there, her eyes filled with emotion that words couldn't contain. Regret lingered in her expression, mixed with something fragile and hopeful. But Aarav had already learned his lesson. Love that needed validation from others to survive was never truly secure. He conducted the meeting professionally, without bias, without bitterness. Every decision he made was fair, every word measured, because that's who he was. Not the man they had judged, not the man they had underestimated, but the man who had endured, who had built, and who had grown without losing his integrity. When the meeting ended, there was a silence that felt heavier than any argument. And in that silence, everything that had once been unsaid became painfully clear. Aarav didn't linger. He walked away again, just as he had months ago. But this time it felt different. This time, he wasn't walking away from loss. He was walking forward with clarity, with strength, and with quiet understanding of his own worth. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever felt misunderstood, judged, or underestimated, take a moment to like, comment, and share. Your engagement helps stories like this reach others who need them. Because sometimes, the people the world overlooks are the ones who carry the greatest strength. And sometimes, walking away isn't losing. It's choosing yourself. And just before you go, tell me in the comments, have you ever had to walk away from something you love to protect your self-worth? Because stories like yours matter too. The sun was setting as Aarav returned home that evening, painting the sky in shades of gold and warmth. Meher ran to him the moment he stepped inside, her laughter filling the space that had once felt so empty. And in that moment, he realized something simple yet profound. He hadn't lost everything, because the most important part of his life had been right there all along, waiting, loving him without conditions. And that was more than enough.